All right, thank you, Katie, for broadcasting and hitting record. Hi, and welcome everybody to the Older Americans Act Performance System, or OAAPS, Reporting Variance Analysis Guidance webinar. This is Amity Overall-Labe, NORT Director, and our speakers today are Louise Ryan, the National Ombudsman Program Coordinator with the Administration for Community Living, and Maria Green, NORT Consultant. There are going to be links to the PowerPoint in the chat box here in just a moment. And then as usual, we do record this training and all materials in the recording will be posted shortly after our live training. Next slide, please. Our presentation today is primarily about preparing for the variance analysis reporting in OAAPS, but the agenda also includes a few remarks from Louise Ryan, a brief review of questions from the NORS check-in and OAAPS readiness session from October, and time for questions. Next slide, please. Speaking of submitting questions, you can ask questions by using the chat box or Q&A feature on your screen. As you may have noticed, all attendees are muted. It is fine to use either of those, but if you could put your questions in the Q&A and any chat in the chat box, that would be great. That way it's just easier for us to track. When you have a question, please submit it anytime, and you can get those icons if you haven't used Zoom before by scrolling your mouse down the screen, and those will pop up in a black bar. Now I'm going to turn it over to Louise for a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Amity. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited that we are getting closer and closer to our first NORS reporting in the Older Americans Act Performance System. And I just want to highlight a couple things that you'll probably notice as you get into what we call the OAAPS. One is that, for lack of a better comparison, I just see the NORS data collection, your codes and everything, and especially the part that the state ombudsmen have to do, the part 3, is much more entwined with the Older Americans Act Performance System. So it just, sometimes as we've been designing these materials, it's sometimes hard to separate out the two issues. So like a prime example is today, you are looking at your variances of your NORS data, but all that explanation is going into the OAAPS. So again, our whole process has changed compared to how you used to report in the Ombudsman reporting tool. Before you could put in anything, we'd encourage you to try to compare the previous year to the current year and make adjustments before you submitted, but you could submit with anything, literally anything. And now you have to justify what those variances are about before you can submit. So it's a huge change. So I just want to kind of emphasize that, and I hope you'll find it valuable. And I am looking forward to seeing a kind of more clear documentation of why your data changed. I think it'll be really helpful in terms of looking at program quality, the impact of COVID, of course, and the other factors that have impacted your program. I think we'll have a better way to collect that information. A couple things that have come across my emails lately that I just want to re-emphasize. The old data software Ombudsman reporting tool is over. You do not go in there to report, right? You go into the OAAPS. But you may want to go into the Ombudsman reporting tool to copy and paste your conflicts of interest data, look back at your systems advocacy reports if you don't have them elsewhere, run reports. So I encourage you to keep, to keep your ORT active. You can get in there, you can update your password and all of that. And if you're new, you can get logged in as a new user fairly easily. With the OAAPS, I know some of you are still in the process of establishing your credentials to log in. Logging in that first time is a bit of a hurdle if you're an admin user, which state ombudsmen are. And so I know there's a few of you still out there that aren't quite in yet for one reason or another. So one thing is make sure you return to me your signed rules of behavior, because if I don't have that, I can't put in the request for you to have access. And then once you get that invitation from what's called OCTA, who knows why, once you get that invitation from OCTA, please follow through immediately as soon as you can, because that password is time limited. So, you know, I've been working one-on-one with a lot of you to kind of get through different hurdles, and I'll continue to do that until we get everybody who is an admin user into the system. And finally, with OAAPS, if you want to add other users yourself, you are welcome to do that on your own. It's very simple. And you can just add people who can just view reports, view the data. You can add somebody who can view and edit and help with the report. Have at it. And you don't have to go through ACL, IT, or me or anything. You can just do that yourself. So thank you. And oh, one last thing. As you start to work on your report, your 2020 report, and I know about at least 10 of you have started, thank you. You will see that you can't run a 2-year compare report yet or a variance report because the 2019 data hasn't been loaded. It's almost ready to be loaded. We had to do some final checks with the crosswalk of the old NORs to the new codes. The data's been crosswalked. It looks good. I've done a lot of double and triple checking. And so you will get that 2019 data will be in there soon. The old data going back 10 years has already been crosswalked and is in the OAAPS, but 2019 isn't quite there yet, so almost. And with that, I will turn it back over to Maria.
Hello, everyone. So during the October session, we received several questions regarding conflicts of interest. As a reminder, the prior year's conflict of interest narratives are in the Ombudsman reporting tool. As Louise mentioned, not in OAAPS. I'm so thankful that y'all can go back into ORT and pull that information if you don't have a recording of it or a written narrative of your prior conflicts of interest and remedies. But you can go back and search for those. You can go back as far, we recommend going back at least 4 years to federal fiscal year 2016 to see which ones your state may have submitted in prior years. And then you can copy those forward. In the future years, the good news is that these conflict of interest will be stored in OAAPS. And if you have no new conflicts of interest, you can just click that handy dandy button that says same as last year. And also remember, do not submit any individual conflicts of interest, only ones pertaining to the organizations. Louise is going to discuss the next slide.
Yeah, just kind of again re-emphasizing what has changed with the OAAPS and how we will, what we used to call certify reports, we're now calling approving reports. Again, after you submit your report with your justification of your variances, ACL, most likely me, and I'm hoping a couple other folks, will review your report, the variances and the variance justification. And then you can pretty much expect, just like in the old days when Marianne Vollingstad would email you with a bunch of questions, you can pretty much expect that ACL will return the report. so that we will review it. We will likely have questions and we'll return the report. And when we return the report, we will itemize those questions. Everything, all the communication is done within OAAPS. So if we return it to you, you will get an email to tell you to go into the OAAPS and review the comments. And then you respond to the comments, make any corrections that you need to make in your report as appropriate. And so we keep a really clear record of what has happened. And then once, there may be another back and forth, you may make some changes, resubmit your report, it's reviewed again. I might say, oh, I missed this last time, what about this? And then you've got to respond to that, and maybe you have to change data, maybe you don't. And so there will be that back and forth. And then eventually, and hopefully it won't be too much back and forth, we will approve your report. And once it's approved, you're finished. So that's kind of how this will work. And next slide to Maria.
So for those of you who might need programmatic assistance, Amity and I are going to be your points of contact for that. You can start with me, and I will certainly lean on the other NORC team members for guidance for any issues that you have. And then I know it's going to be very important for you to have current access to the NORC website, where there's the State Ombudsman private site. And if you have forgotten your password, if it's old and you need a new one, whatever troubles you might have with accessing the private site for the Ombudsman, contact Katie. There's her email there. And the reason I'm reminding you of that site, that is where we sent a lot of that's where the specific guidance around submission of your annual NORS report is residing, on that private site for State Ombudsman, because on the regular site, your local representatives would be viewing it if it was there. Okay, the other important thing to remember is that if you have technical issues, you're having trouble uploading a data file, for instance, your point of contact is going to be that email address that's highlighted there in the blue box on the right-hand side. It's OAAPS Help Desk. All the words are run together at aclhhs.gov. Okay, and Louise is going to take the next one. Next slide.
Oh, Maria, could I just add with that? Be sure that you click on the link, not just email OAAPS, because when you click on the link at the bottom, it's going to ask what title you are, Title 7. It's going to ask some certain things to help them better help you. So just want to put that out there.
Thanks, Louise. And if you'll talk about this one, Louise, the timing of the NORS fiscal management responsibilities.
Yes, thank you. I put myself back on mute. So just a reminder, because as I've seen in past years, one of the things that really holds people back in finalizing their report is the fiscal funds expended section of NORS. So please work on this now. Work with your fiscal staff to get a rough draft, at least, of what the funds expended were and the sources of funds, right? So this really is something you need to work on now. In January, you should have your final numbers and can report that. And then the other thing you want to think about is, or just be aware of, is in the summer, you will get the certification form. It's called the Certification of Long-Term Care Ombudsman Expenditures. And that is going to look at what was reported as your base minimum funding for Title VII and Title III. And did your program meet that base required minimum funding? And the base year is now 2019. So, just putting that out there as a reminder. If you are having challenges reaching your fiscal staff, getting information, let me know, and I can work with ACL Fiscal and see if they can reach out to your fiscal people. But that's why you need to be trying to talk to Fiscal now, because if you don't go to Fiscal until January 25th and your report's due in 6 days, you're going to be late. You're going to have bad data, and it just can really drag things down. So again, reach out to your fiscal people now. If by early January you're not getting anywhere, let me know, because we can try to, with our fiscal staff, kind of encourage your fiscal staff to get busy. And with that, let's go to the next slide. I think I kind of got ahead of myself, but just some reminders here. NORC has put together some great tools, and you can bring these with you or email them to the fiscal staff, so that there's even a fillable form, right? So they can even fill out the form for you. So if nothing else, if you don't have a meeting set up, email the fillable form to them, and email them Part F, the guidance from the NORS training. The Part F is the funds expended. And you can email them the table, just so they have that too. So you can email all 3 of these documents. And I would say, if you haven't talked to your fiscal people, if you haven't emailed them, I would say, do this today. This is one really easy thing you can do. All right, next slide. Questions. We're going to see at this point.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Maria. Yes, we wanted to take some time for questions since we covered some, I don't want to say old stuff, but some previous material before we get to the newer stuff with the new resource. So submit your questions. And I see one from, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Louise.
Yeah, I see there is a question. It says, will all users get an email? So there's 2 ways. If you're an admin user, your email comes from Okta to set up your account. Once you set up your account, you never have to look at that Okta thing again. You can go right into the OAAPS and just forget about that weird Okta thing. If you set up users, they will get an email. I believe I'm thinking it probably says OAAPS, but I'm not certain. Maria, do you know when I set you up what the email, where it came from? But yes, they will get an email, and it will, have them set up a password and it'll give them a user ID and have them set up a password. The other thing for admin users, just a reminder, when you go to log in, your user ID is your first name, last name at portal.acl.gov. And if you try to sign in with your, louise.ryan@acl or whatever your, typical email is, you'll get a very weird message. So you have to use first name, last name at portal.acl.gov. So for the admin users, and for those who you set up to be just a regular user, it's a little bit different process, and it's very, I know, who was it? Carla, I think, did it yesterday, and it worked. So it's pretty straightforward to set up new users.
Great. Thanks for the question, Mark, and thanks, Louise, for the response. We don't have any other questions in the queue, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And if you have questions about this part of the presentation, feel free to ask as we move forward. So we do have a poll question for you. Katie, if you want to go ahead and launch that. Basically, have you uploaded a data file to OAAPS yet? Answers, please choose 1. Yes, I am so ready to get this report done. No, but tech support is working on it. or when is this due? I'll give you some time. All right, Katie, can we share the results if we're at least at 50% responses? All right, so about 12% or 5 folks said that yes, and you're on it. 29 people, 69% said no, but working on it, and 8 responded with when is this due? So we will get to the timeline here soon. So good question for those 8 that answered that. Thank you for responding to that poll. Katie, we can go ahead and jump to the slide with the new button on it. And I'll turn it back over to Maria. Thank you.
So just in reference to the poll responses, I've been just really pleased with how many of you have taken some steps to become familiar with the system. Those of you who are already aware that from your vendor or from your IT support staff that you're trying to extract those data files and get them ready. So I just want you to take a moment and congratulate yourself for the steps that you're taking now. It's going to make it so much better for you towards the end of January when you complete the report. So let's talk about this new guidance that you see on the screen here in front of you. It was recently sent to you by email. It's on the NORC website on the private side, and there is a link to the guide in the chat feature. This variance analysis guidance describes the task, resource materials, OAAPS references, has variance tips, and it provides you examples. So this is all relating to how you're going to respond to those variances when they come up and there's a difference of information from last year and this year. And as Louise said earlier, you're going to need to give some thought to it, submit all of those variances before you make your first submission of your report into OAAPS. And then when Louise and others review, they may have questions back for you again. So on the next slide, these are just some key points or takeaways for you. Once the data is validated, the report must be checked for variances and identify those variances and explain them. So the variances are generated by OAAPS, and your responses to those variances are submitted through that same system. So you're, as Louise mentioned earlier, you're not going to hear from our dear friend Marianne. More than likely, it's going to be an email that's going to come through the system, and you will have a log of those email communications. So the variances are calculated for the current reporting cycle for a data field that is plus or minus 10% compared to the same data field in the previous reporting cycle or previous year. It's 10% for all of them except volunteer staff and volunteer representatives, and that has a threshold of 25%. Where there is a variance that is really, that's the best way I can say, no big deal, or it's really obvious why there's a variance, it is appropriate for you to check a little box that says no significant factors. And I would just mention that I would be judicious about how I use those. I wouldn't use it for everything, because that's probably not in all likelihood possible, that nothing is not a significant variance. So just kind of keep that in mind. And as mentioned earlier, there's that wonderful crosswalk as best it could be done from the old NORS codes to the new NORS codes. So you are going to see some gaps in 2019 data where there was not an appropriate crosswalk between the two. Okay, next slide has some more tips. So I feel like we're kind of English language classes again in high school and college, but it's a good reminder that your information needs to be complete and accurate, consistent, clear, plausible, and you explain the why and the what. So I'm just going to give you a poor example of an explanation. That would be the residential care community's numbers of complaints decreased because we had changes to our program responsibilities. So a better example or a way to explain that would be to say, our state created an Ombudsman program for individuals with intellectual disabilities during federal fiscal year 2019 reporting period. As of FFY 2020, the state Ombudsman program is no longer responsible for providing Ombudsman services in those facilities licensed to provide residential care to individuals with disabilities. For this reason, our number of RCC complaints decreased in federal fiscal year 2020. On the next slide, there's some more tips. We're recommending, you can see there on the left-hand side, these are the tools that we've created that we think would be really helpful for you to understand and look ahead of before you start writing these variances. And we've even been so kind to give you the page numbers there where you can look it up faster. And in the system, in OAAPS, you're going to need to identify each variance separately and provide an explanation for each, unless it's just very logical that there are two variations that have the same response. For instance, a COVID pandemic response might be a reason that more than one would show up. Also, if let's say you have written your explanation for the variance where it applies for the pandemic and COVID, if that's a common variance that you're going to report, you can just say, refer back to it and not have to copy and paste it each time into the document. Not the document, into the system, excuse me. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So these are just a few of the things. It's not exhaustive, but these are some of the things that might cause you to think, I better consider this variable when writing my variance narrative. So of course we've missed with the ones there that you can see. A few others possibly are financial decreases or increases in targeted fund sources could have made a change. Staffing, volunteer changes in numbers, experience, or training has probably impacted your work. Maybe there's a closure of a facility that had a lot of significant problems in the past. You could have had some changes in your Ombudsman program goals from the prior year. There could just be some plain old data entry issues, like your staff weren't reporting as they should have. There was duplication. Maybe at the same time we were making the switch, you also started a new computer system. So there might have been some challenges there. And the good old typos or transposing of numbers, that kind of thing can happen. So be on the lookout for these potential factors. The next slide. This is a quickie to show you. This is that landing page again where you start with an OAAPS. In the next slide, I've done just a few screenshots from OAAPS that I thought might be helpful. You may have seen these before, but if not, you might find them of help. At the very bottom of the left-hand navigation column, that's where you see variance analysis. And when you click that button, then it's going to populate the data in comparison between federal fiscal year 2020 and 2019. Next page. I've circled there the box where it's the click this box for validating all data. It's going to take a little while for this to happen. I know I got really anxious about it and thought it was taking too long and submitted a help desk, and they were like, no, be more patient. It's going to come through. So it does take a little while to load that. The red errors on the right-hand side are an indication of the ones that are going to require an explanation. Next slide.
And just to add, Maria, you can also validate each section if you want to go through as you're doing it. You can validate, and that would take a little less time when you click that validate all data button down there.
That's an excellent point. I know in the past few weeks when I've been meeting individually with state ombudsman programs, many people have been encouraged to know that you can go into the system and you can do pieces of it at a time and save your information. And that way it's not so overwhelming if you sit down to do it all at once. So this screen shows explanation of variances. And I want to do just a little disclaimer that if you're trying to read the information in the narrative box down at the bottom, it might not match completely what we've got in the guidance. That's because during the time that I was working on this in the pilot site, the contractor needed to wipe out my previous work. There's just, that's okay, I understand, but I didn't get to update it to match all the words exactly in the guide that you have. Wanted to highlight a couple of things. So the green arrow on the right-hand side is indicating the bright yellow highlights where it's either going to require you to explain the variance, or you, if appropriate, you would check that little box that says no significant varior factors identified. Then at the very bottom left-hand side with the green arrow, it's important to check that little box. When you have finished writing all the explanations, mark as complete. Next slide. So let's say a section does not require any variance explanations. It's going to highlight with that green arrow on the top right-hand corner. You'll see it's going to tell you that there's no significant variances. And so, you know, you're not going to have to enter anything in that text box. Part of this is because there's no data. If you'll see in this example, there was no data under this test sample that I did under 2018. You're going to have some that won't have data for 2019 because that data element didn't crosswalk. Excuse me. When you get ready in 2022 to submit federal fiscal year 2021, you're going to have the prior year's data. It's going to populate. It's going to be good to see everything there so that you can see the differences. Next slide. I love this section. When you go first enter into your pages, your state's page, landing page, there's that tab for analysis reports. And all of these are very helpful and informative, but the ones you might look back at frequently are the multi-year complaint trend and the 2-year comparison report. So let's say that you're trying to figure out why did this complainant type increase or decrease? Maybe you can look back 3 or 4 years in your multi-year complaint trend report and see it's a change, and that might be a trigger to remind you, oh yeah, we retrained our staff on this back in that year. That's made a change now. Okay. I think that covers it on that page. So on variance analysis, case and complaints. So this is the one that requires you absolutely have to upload a data file. You'll be extracting that from whatever your software system is, uploading it into OAAPS. And these are the things that it's going to check for that you see on the list here. Okay, on the next slide.
Maria, could I just clarify you around could we go back to the other slide?
Okay.
So as you know, just to be clear, because sometimes people get a little confused, to submit your to get your case and complaint data into OAAPS, you have to upload a data file, right? So then you're going to see your numbers of cases and complaints and the types and all of that. You can extract a report to double check it and you can look at it. So it takes, when you upload your case and complaint data, that will be used to create your variance report. So it just does it behind the scenes. It's going to compare it to 2019 and the data will be crosswalked so that, you know, we've collapsed so many complaint codes. So all those codes that went away got mapped into the new codes. So you'll be comparing, you'll be making a fair comparison, if that makes sense. And once you do that, you'll see what I mean once you see the variance reports. You know, you'll see how if you tried to compare 2020 to your old 2019 NORS, it'd be hard to do unless you crosswalk it. So.
Okay, thanks, Louise. On the next slide, there's some tips. So this one is important to run the reports in your software system to check the accuracy of coding of cases and complaints. So truthfully, Amity or I, or probably even Louise, aren't going to be able to help you figure out your software system. If you have challenges or questions about your software system, you're going to need to contact your vendor or your IT support staff in your state to help you figure that out. Okay. If you transitioned this year to a new state software program, I encourage you to look for any issues regarding accuracy of those data entries. If you did a merger of old state data from the old software into the new software, look to see what's going on there. Check those automated reports coming out of your software system to make sure they're accurate. And then if you find hiccups in your software system, this is the time to explain it in that variable, variance, explanation, explain. We discovered this in our system that we weren't aware of until now, and here's what we're going to do to correct it. Next slide. So this is an explanation, and I believe this one is in the guide, but it's highlighted once again to show you where I should be giving a variance. So if you look at the next slide, please. So in this box, there may be, if you remember from the previous slide, there were at least 4 things that potentially needed an explanation. So this is the second of the 4 things that I might be explaining. And that example I gave a while ago about the Ombudsman program creating your state created a separate program for group homes for individuals with intellectual disabilities that accounts for your drop in cases. That's where the narrative would show there. And as we've recommended a couple of times, you may want to write your narratives somewhere else other than the OAAPS system, Word, for example. And then you can do your word count. You can review and check for errors. You can ask other staff to review it and give input. You can have up to 3,400 characters in a box. So that's a lot of explaining. Second slide, the next slide, please. Is the second example. So this is one where, in the hypothetical explanation, I said, the representatives in the prior year had over-reported the Ombudsman program as the complainant. And if you look on the next slide, you can see it in the box just a little bit better. And we just basically told it as it was. They had over-reported the Ombudsman program as the complainant because they thought it was quicker and less taxing on the resident. We retrained. Now they're doing the appropriate coding, and so that's why you see an increase in the current year that you're reporting.
And I would just like to add, it's
Yes.
okay to say, we made a mistake last year and this was wrong. You know, it's okay if that's, you know, so then moving forward, how do you correct that mistake and make sure you don't continue it? So it's really okay if you discover, and this is very common, you discover, oh, we did something, you know, we were off last year for some reason. So that's okay. You know, it's not so much if there's a piece of data to correct, we want it corrected. If it's just an error, we just want to know, you know, that maybe the previous year there was a mistake.
And I know that Louise and her colleagues at ACL would love to see you explain it and then you say, here's how we're going to correct it. Here's how we're going to train on this next year. Here's what we're going to do with our software system. You know, go ahead and give an explanation of how you think that you're going to handle what you've identified. So on the next slide, this is an example for organizational structure. And, you know, there's some tips you might want to look back through, especially if you're a new state ombudsman. You might want to look back through if you have a decentralized model, look at all those contracts with the local ombudsman program entities and see if anything changed. Look back at your work during the past federal fiscal year and see whether or not you changed or amended contract agreements. So these are just some ideas to give you some triggers to think through. On the next slide, and we're still talking about organizational structure, I pretended here to make a mistake. And you see in my 2019 in this circle of red, I said that there were 16 entities and that they were grouped under other. And all of a sudden when this variance was run, I was like, oh my gosh, I made a big mistake. I didn't mean to put them there. So the next slide is going to show you how to go back and correct this. You just go back to the left-hand side, go to the appropriate box. In this case, it's organizational structure. Click on it, and then where you see my green outline here, I just went back in and I put the appropriate numbers back in. You once again, you save it, you click validate all data, and then you check your variances again. You can do this as many times as you need to. It's not going to break the system. So don't worry about how many times you have to change information or upload your data file. Just make sure that you save each time. Okay, the next slide. I think this is just showing, following up on that example where I made the corrections and that you see I only have 2 outstanding variances that I need to explain. And basically in this fictional scenario, I was saying that the state de-designated 2 of the AAAs due to poor performance. And then you turn around and you entered a new contract with a 501c3 nonprofit, which was not a AAA. And then this resulted in a regional reorganization and reduction in the total number of local ombudsman entities. And for purposes of ease and clarity, I gave fairly succinct, brief narratives. But I encourage you, believe me, you've got a lot of words, you've got a lot of space. So if you need to give more and more detailed and further explanations, please do so. On the next slide, this is the category for staff and volunteers. For this one, there is a variance of 25%. All the others, it was a 10% variance. This is 25%. Okay, next slide. So these are just tips to remember that your number of employees must be a whole number. And your FTEs are calculated by converting the weekly work hours of the employees into a ratio. So I give an example, I believe, on the next page. for this FTE. So if a person works 100% time on ombudsman work, that's 1 FTE. If it's a part-time employee and they're designated as a 50% part-time person, you would enter it as 0.5 FTEs. If they only work 10 hours a week with the ombudsman program, then it's 0.25. So you get the idea. It's just going back in time a little bit to our algebra and math that we had. Okay, next slide. So this is a staff and volunteers variance explanation. And this was at the level of the state office of Ombudsman staff. Total state volunteers, I had put in 1. And then the change was 0 for 2019 in this example. And so really, yes, I wrote an explanation for it, but this might have been one that definitely you could check no significant factors identified. Okay, next slide. So funds expended. I appreciate that Louise started us off by explaining some of the importance of this. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of these. These are all the various sources that you're going to be working with your budget people to retrieve. Okay, on the next slide. So I encourage you now to start meeting with your fiscal staff. I was talking with the state office this week, and they know up front that they're not going to get the real numbers out of their fiscal staff until the 3rd week of January, I believe it was. But they both admit it's best to start it now because these folks are busy doing a lot of other things. I think if you provide them the materials that we've produced that will help them, and you start that conversation now, hopefully it will help and you'll get accurate numbers and maybe a little bit more timely. Always check for transposed numbers, and once again, explain the why and the what for any variances. On the next slide, I believe I gave an example. And this was my very brief explanation of the pandemic. I pretended that, the president, our governor, my fictitious governor of the state of Maria, declared emergencies due to COVID-19 pandemic. And I gave an explanation of how the CARES Act funding was used. Okay. Your explanation certainly may be a lot longer. You may have used the CARES Act funding for multiple things, not just as in my example, which I said we used it for PPE. Next slide. So I gave explanations based on each source. So in addition to what we may have gotten from the federal government for CARES, the state funds, I had in this narrative that the legislature had also generously appropriated some money for the Ombudsman program. And I explained that was one-time funding and how it was spent. Then under local sources, I gave an example. You might have this happen where in one of your local ombudsman entities, maybe they lost or gained some local funding. So you can explain that. Once again, these are just examples to kind of trigger your thought processes. On the next slide, we're switching over to talk about facilities. And ideally, if you could get this information in a data file from your licensing regulatory agency in your state, that would be great. If not, what I'm hearing from a lot of state ombudsmen and talking with you is that you're just reaching out, you're calling your point person or your liaison with the regulatory agency and asking them for this information. And we recommend that you gather this information from them, say September the 30th of each calendar year for when you report it into NORS. Okay, next slide. So in this example, I like to just say I'm telling it just like it is. You know, I didn't soft pedal it. I just said, look, the agency's facility database was totally ineffective. It was outdated. We really can't trust any of the data that we had reported to you in the past. So here's what we're going to do, or here's the good news, that the agency has new software and that in the future, your residential care community numbers are going to be improved and hopefully all on target.
Maria, I just also want to interject that if you maintain your own software where facilities come online, you add them, facilities go offline, you take them or you deactivate them. And if you can pull it from your own system, more power to you, because, you know, if you're good at keeping up that, I know it can be really hard if you've got a lot of those little family homes to do that, but if you can do that, great. So I just want to put in a plug for that. And I know it's not always possible, and we always are looking at for these types of data, you know, the point in time, it's always September 30th. As of September 30th, what was the number of facilities and beds?
Okay, great, thank you. So the next slide is an example for program activities. And just that same reminder again that OAAPS will not be able to calculate a variance for many of these activities because we revised the NORS data code. And what you're going to see when you provide the information, you ask for the variance, you're going to see not applicable because there wasn't a crosswalk to show you. Next slide. So we know that the program activities have been greatly impacted due to the pandemic. And so these are simple explanations, but please feel free to add more to tell your state's experience. And I'll just pause a minute there for you to read those. And I'm just going to put in a good word here for Louise for this, because I think this information would be so helpful to her if she's been asked by ACL or HHS officials, or something's being provided to Congress, for her to be able to say, you know, here's the information, here's what states are telling us, this is how the pandemic impacted the work of the long-term care ombudsman program.
Yeah, this is where I would see this variance explanation being really helpful with regards to COVID. And one person asked in the chat if we could say COVID, that would be not a significant factor. Well, we know COVID is a significant factor. And I think the intent of the question was we would just assume to know that, and that's why the data changed, which, yes, we can assume that probably nobody's going to have any facilities that received a visit each quarter in fiscal year 20 because of COVID. So maybe your explanation there is brief. Yes, because of COVID, we could not visit facilities. Therefore, we did not meet therefore we did not have any routine access. But in these examples, to show why your information and assistance went up, or your community education or resident or family councils because you went to virtual meetings and had more of them. The other thing is with your funds expended, you can say, yes, because of the CARES Act, we spent more money on X, Y, and Z. Those kinds of things are really helpful because we do get questions about, well, how are ombudsman programs spending the money? Or, well, they couldn't visit, so they really weren't very busy. What did they do? You know, kind of that challenge too. So this will be really helpful. I will be pulling this information out and, you know, categorizing it for future use. So thanks, Maria.
So on the next slide, it's just an example of a simple explanation for the decrease of which we expect to see of routine access to nursing facilities and routine access to residential care communities.
And I would just add, it's okay to what I would call bundle a response. So if you say routine access, nursing facilities, and residential care communities, and then just have the explanation, that's fine. You know, you don't have to repeat, you know, if it makes sense to bundle things, like, you know, you might not see a significant reason as to why complaints dropped other than COVID, but so that might be the global explanation, but you might want to highlight a couple where you think it is significant, like, you know, transfer and discharge complaints increased or they decreased, and you think that COVID played a role. So, you know, I guess I would say, you know, when it's appropriate, bundle; when it's appropriate, paste in other sections to paste the same answer, but also to really look at what changed this year and what was significant about it and share that. Thanks.
Yeah. And I would just say the opposite extreme of that is your default shouldn't always be COVID. I mean, surely there's some other possible variables that impacted the data. So I would just be cautious about that. It's been my pleasure to talk with you about this today. I'm going to turn over to Amity to monitor or talk about the questions and our resources.
Thanks, Maria. Thank you, Louise. While folks are adding some more questions to the queue, I do want to review what were already submitted and answered, just to make sure everyone heard the questions and the answers, because I know some of them were in the chat and some were in the Q&A. So let's see, already answered the question about the email. One question was, do the reports that you upload need to be in Excel format? And just as a reminder, please look at the OAAPS training materials. There are a lot of technical assistance resources, one very comprehensive user guide, and then I want to say 5 off the top of my head quick reference guides. And so definitely review those first and then work with your vendor, because there's actually several options. It doesn't have to be Excel. There's other formatting options for those uploads. So please check there. And some other chat questions, I know that Louise addressed some of them, but just to reiterate, one question was, is the date you first submit the report after answering the system-generated questions, so those variance questions, does that date count as the date submitted, or the date we answer the questions from actual staff once they review the report? Good question, and thanks for seeking that clarification. So just to be clear, so everyone on the call hears, once you submit your report in OAAPS and you've answered those variance questions, that is considered the submission date. So it just needs to be submitted by January 31st. And similar to ORT and previous reporting, the additional questions that come after from ACL reviewers, that's just in addition to, that doesn't make your report late or anything like that. So once you submit it, answer those variance questions. As long as you do that by January 31st, you're good.
Right. You answer the variance questions. Once you complete all that, you then can move to the submission stage. And just January 31st is the deadline, and then that would be considered on time. And then approval, ideally, I'd like to have all the reports approved by the end of March. I'm hoping that because you have to do this upfront variance explanation work, that it might help things go more quickly. So that's my goal. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thanks, Louise. any other questions? I don't see any others in the Q&A at the moment or in the chat. So just as a reminder, before I get to kind of our timeline of OAAPS reporting, this is our final live webinar training before you actually submit your report. So take advantage of it and ask any questions that you have.
Louise, this is Maria. I had one question earlier in the week. I don't know if you've had a chance to find out or if you already know the answer, but one state asked if those within the state unit on aging can see, well, one was, can they view the Title VII information once it's put into OAAPS? The second question was, do they or can they alter any of that information as a state unit on aging user within OAAPS?
So the answer is you as state ombudsman are the king or queen of your data and who has access. The state unit does not have access to the OAAPS. They would only have access to the OAAPS if you give them access. And if you want to give them the ability to view the data, that would be fine, but they are not they don't work directly for your program, so they should not be viewing and editing your data. It's your report. This report is, what you should be using to remember your NORS report or your state report. If you do a different kind of pretty report, you are to be reporting to, the licensing agency, the state unit, legislators, what is happening in your state. You are to issue a report. You can use your NORS report as a starting point. Some states choose to do it on their state fiscal year, but this is your report. And I also want to remind everybody that your report is a public document. So if you choose to, not spell check, write something that isn't really very clear in your, say, systems advocacy or complaint narrative, that's on you. I mean, I could send it back and say, fix it. I haven't in the past. I've just accepted what you submitted, unless you just ended mid-paragraph, and, that sometimes happened. So, it's quite possible, and it has happened, that people have requested your full NORS report, and I have sent to them with the narratives, typos and all, to that person who requested it. So I've said it before and I'll say it again, that you have to really think about this report as if the public were reading it, as if a member of Congress were reading it, because it's possible that everything in there, it's not confidential, it's not personally identifiable. And if somebody requests your whole report, there's no reason for me to say no. So kind of a long answer and a little bit of a lecture, but it's one of my frustrations to see, narratives that are not very thoughtful. And in fact, that is why you have such structure to the narratives now, to try to help shape what your program has done. So I went way off course on that question, but couldn't help myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. We received a couple more questions. While the system does its variance check, can you log out, or do you have to wait for that to be complete?
Oh, you can log out. It's going to do its thing. But you have to hit the variance button. Yeah, you can log out. I tend to, when I've done the reports, I tend to just hit the validate as I go, because then I don't have to wait a long time for it to validate. And it's confusing because there's two terms. There's validate So the system does some checks to make sure your data makes sense. Like, you know, an example of validation is you can't have fewer complaints than cases, right? So you have to have, if you have 100 cases, you have to have at least 100 complaints. So that's like a validation. So you have to validate everything. Once it's done, then you click on that variance report and can go into the variances. But yeah, you can log out anytime. Another question, will we be able to export, print a report as submitted, approved? Yes. And when you're in the system, you can always export your report as you're working on it even. Yeah, so yep, definitely. And the follow-up on the question, an example, I got timed out waiting for a variance report and wanted to know if that was a problem. So hopefully, yeah, I'm not sure why you got timed out. And I would say if you have weird things happen while you're in the system, like you shouldn't be timed out, you haven't been in there that long, you've been active, I would just report that to the OAAPS help desk because that'll just help them to troubleshoot any problems.
Good point. Thank you. All right. Well, we have plenty of time for me to go through the last few slides, just reiterating timeframes and important resources. So if, as we're going through those slides, it triggers some more questions, feel free to add those to the Q&A box or the chat. So next slide, Katie. Thank you. So as you've already heard a few times, but bears repeating, from now until the end of this month, we need y'all to go into OAAPS, access it, review the technical assistance resources I mentioned earlier on all of our materials, namely the one, I think it's just a one-pager about what you need to know now about OAAPS. You know, there's links to all those technical assistance resources, or you can just find them in that landing page under resources for Title VII. So definitely read through those and practice submitting your reports. It's really important to collect your complaint data, make sure it's in the appropriate file, and then practice uploading that as well. In January 2021, you'll be submitting your very first report into the system for federal fiscal year 2020. And as we mentioned earlier, it's due by the 31st. Just to reiterate what Maria mentioned earlier, you can start practicing and submitting now and getting ahead of the work. So even if you're waiting on the OCTA process and all of that to get into OAAPS and you don't have access yet, you can at least start drafting your narratives in Word and sketching those out, making, you know, doing some spell checks and proofreading and all of that fun stuff. So go ahead and get ahead of the curve. And also just a friendly reminder, remember that there's only a few of us on staff really able to provide that programmatic assistance and TA. And between now and January 31st, if everyone waits until the end of January, then it's going to be challenging to respond in a timely manner to all of those requests, although, of course, we will do our best. So we encourage you to get in there as early as possible, start playing around, and uploading and getting comfortable with the system.
And I would add also,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
if I could just add that if you're not in OAAPS yet, to see what can you do in your own software. Can you export a report for OAAPS, for instance? Have you been able to do that? Because you should have some way to export your data into one of the approved templates for upload into OAAPS. So have you tried doing that? That would be a really important step to take and see if it works.
Thank you. Good point. So on the next slide are links to those resources that I mentioned. Of course, we have our main NORS and OAAPS web pages for additional information, and those include general NORS FAQs. So that's more about how do you document and report Ombudsman program activities. And just as a reminder, I know I mentioned this on the NASOP membership meeting last week that we are receiving several questions from local representatives as well as their association about how to document activities during COVID, for example, visits. And we have those answers in those FAQs. So please, please, I know that you've probably already shared them, but repeat and share that information as often as possible to help ensure consistency in reporting and data collection. So there are all the links that you need. Of course, we have a landing page for NORS and OAAPS on the State Ombudsman side, the password protected side that Maria mentioned earlier. If you need your password for that, contact Katie. And then we also have on the public facing side on our regular NORS page, there's a link specifically to resources for State Ombudsman. So we put them in both places because we understand that you may have some state staff that need access to those training materials. And so they are on that public site as well. And if you have questions for finding those, let us know, but there are all the links right there. Next slide, please. Just to reiterate, for technical assistance, for access to the system, contact Louise. For programmatic assistance, we really do ask that you contact Maria first at that email address, simply because that will be more timely than reaching out to our Ombuds Center regular resource email, because then we'd have to just route it to her or myself depending on time. So please do that. Katie's email's there if you need access to the State Ombudsman website. And then any technical difficulties, as we mentioned earlier, use that link that's within the OAAPS system. As Louise mentioned, that creates a form, and that's really important for their tracking and their TA process. Next slide.
So Amity, there was one question on the Q&A about the resources. So, and you covered what's on the NORC side, but just a reminder that on the OAAPS side is all of the recorded trainings and all of the OAAPS specific resources. So right now there's like 2 places to go. NORC is more for the NORS, and then the State Ombudsman, like what we've done today. And then the OAAPS has all of the how to do OAAPS training. So just a reminder about that.
Yes, thanks. And in that specific resource, I mentioned the one-pager about what you need to know about OAAPS. It clearly states that the resources that Louise mentioned on the OAAPS platform are the technical resources about the platform. And again, they are great. And they even have some webinar recordings that you can watch to give some more background about how the system works. So definitely encourage you to review those. Thanks for that clarification, Louise. I didn't see that chat message. So and I will check the chat and Q&A one more time, but just wanted to summarize. Obviously, today we heard from Louise Ryan with ACL. We reviewed some questions from that session in October. We introduced the new guidance resource and shared some examples of variance analysis explanations and responded to your questions. As I mentioned earlier, the slides and recording, of course, will be available on our website, and we'll send an email to all of the registrants, or actually to all the State Ombudsmen, once those materials are posted. So again, if you have state staff that you want access to this information, please just forward the email, or you can tell them to visit the public side of the website on the NORS page, and they can find that information there. So I'm going to give one more check to the Q&A. I don't see any other questions. And I don't see any in the chat either. So with that, the next slide, Katie, of course, is our contact information. So feel free to reach any of us by email or phone. And last but not least, on the next slide, a huge thank you to Louise Ryan and Maria Green for presenting today. And not only presenting and providing a lot of clarification on this issue, but being the source for TA, a lot of programmatic TA in the last few months, and of course moving forward in our reporting process. thank you all for joining us today and for your questions and for getting started in the system. This is going to be exciting to see after this reporting period what the data looks like, despite COVID obviously throwing a wrench in a lot of the data. So please don't hesitate to reach out when you need assistance, and please complete. There's a very brief evaluation that will pop up after we close the webinar, so complete that so we can have some feedback for future training. Louise, Maria, any last comments before we close out?
Just thank you, everybody. I would say don't hesitate. There's no such thing as a dumb question. So anything that is just nagging at you and you feel like, oh, it's just a dumb question, don't hesitate to email. So email me or Maria, whichever makes sense. If it's more of a, OAPS or a NORS OAPS, Maria question. Anyhow, if you're not sure, just email us both. But again, no dumb questions. Ask away.
Exactly. And all those questions just help improve our technical assistance response in our training. So ask away. There's often times that we don't even think about from the user end. So it's really important to hear from you all. And thank you, Katie, for always being a genius behind the scenes and handling all of this with ease. We appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, Katie.
So
Happy holidays, everyone. Look forward to seeing you.
Yes, happy holidays, and we'll give you a little bit more time back in your day. So thank y'all for everything.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Take care. Bye.